23?
Yeah.
31?
Yeah.
Curious. Voor de afgelopen.
Hello and welcome. You're watching I24 News coming to you live from Tel Aviv. Back and forth between the United States, Israel and Qatar over a proposed deal to free the hostages and bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. Firefighters battle wildfires across northern Israel sparked by Hezbollah's ongoing missile attacks. And the UAE outlaws teaching the Muslim holy book, the Quran, online without a license. Qatar says it has sent Israel's terms for a truce and hostage release deal to Hamas, but says it doubts the Israeli government can unite behind it. A Hamas official, meanwhile, said the group didn't believe Israel was serious about a deal. Both sides reportedly have teams in Cairo in an effort to secure a deal that was outlined by the US President Joe Biden last Friday. This a day after Israel announced the deaths of 4 more hostages in Hamas captivity. 124 people are still being held. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran has more.
With a much-awaited ceasefire and hostage deal for Gaza still unresolved, an Israeli delegation is in Egypt on Tuesday to try to complete the task, coinciding with a delegation from Hamas also visiting Cairo. According to the Lebanese Al Akhbar newspaper, citing Egyptian sources, the deal will reportedly take effect at the beginning of next week, despite Hamas not yet giving its official response. The report added that Egypt fears Israel will not fully adhere to the ceasefire after it receives some of the hostages.
Hamas is holding women, children, the sick and the elderly hostage in Gaza. We will keep on doing everything we need for their freedom, to bring them home. This is what any other decent country in the world will do.
The visit comes hours after Israel announced the death of 4 Israeli hostages in Hamas captivity. All 4 appeared in psychological warfare videos released by Hamas as they begged for their lives. The army is checking whether they were killed by IDF fire.
Today we shared the devastating news with the families of 85-year-old Amiram Cooper, one of the founders of Kibbutz Nir Oz, 80-year-old Chaim Perry from Kibbutz Nir Oz, 80-year-old Yoram Metzger from Kibbutz Nir Oz, and 51-year-old Israeli and British citizen Nadav Popelwell from Kibbutz Nirim. That their loved ones were killed a few months ago during Hamas captivity in Gaza, and their bodies are still being held by Hamas. We assess that the 4 of them were killed while together in the area of Khan Yunis during our operation there against Hamas.
Following the announcements, several hundreds of Israelis took to the streets across the country demanding an immediate deal.
היום בערב קיבלנו הוכחה חד משמעית. הנה התוצאות של הלחץ הצבאי. אנחנו מקבלים אותם מתים. אנחנו מקבלים אותם מתים.
With more than a third of the remaining Israeli hostages in Gaza believed to be dead, Monday's announcement illustrates how, despite claims of major achievements on the battlefield, Israel is getting closer and closer to Hamas's demands. Raising the question, is Israel actually doing all it can to bring back its hostages and alive?
Well, for more, let's go down to Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. We're joined by our correspondent Balir Sladin. So, Balir, messages throughout the day from Hamas, Qatar, the United States and Israel. What do we know so far?
Yes, so we're getting from Hamas officials that they're not willing to send any delegation to Cairo because they don't want to start from zero, to start from the beginning, as they are saying, Hamas officials today. And in case the Qataris are wondering whether the Israeli government can unite behind the deal that President Biden announced on last Friday, the current situation that we're looking at in Israel after the announcement from Shas, also Yahdut HaTorah and other parties in Israel, we can see that there is a majority actually inside this government, which is the sole body that takes the final decision whether to go for a deal or not, just like it happened on last November. This government consists of 34 ministers and 4 deputy ministers. If we count the Haredi parties as well as the Mehaneh Mamlechti, so Gantz and Eisenkot's party, as well as the Likud members, the ministers from the Likud, which are 18 people, we get to a very big majority. We're actually talking about 32 ministers that support such a deal and only 6 ministers that oppose to it, which are all from the Zionist religious parties, Smotrich and Ben Gvir's party. So there is a majority inside the Israeli government for such a deal, but the question is whether the Israeli coalition will survive after such a deal. If Hamas says yes to it and the negotiations actually completed and the deal is actually conducted, then what will the religious Zionist parties do? Because Smotrich and Ben Gvir already threatened to bring down the government, as they were saying in the last couple of days, if Israel goes for an irresponsible and dangerous deal, as they are calling it, because the deal, according to them, consists also of Israel's guarantees to Hamas that they will not resume the war after the completion of this deal. And this is the major point of disagreement between all the parties.
זה הדייסה.
זה כפר
זה
לבנוני?
הכפר הלבנוני שתוקף אותנו.
וואלה.
עם נ"טים, עם הכל. זה הכפר הכי מסוכן היום.
All right, Felice Ladin there down in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much indeed. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Sharifine Grossman is a member of Forum Dvorah, Women in Foreign Policy and National Security, and she's the former head of regional affairs at the Israel National Security Council. Great to see you, Shiri, as always. So we don't know quite where Prime Minister Netanyahu stands on this deal, do we? There have been some mixed messages over the past few days. Who wants this deal? Who doesn't want this deal? And can he accept the deal, given that his government could collapse?
Well, it's a bad deal. Let's put things on the table. It's not a good deal, but it's the best deal we can get at this point. And really, we're just playing a blame game, I think, both sides, both Hamas and Israel. That's why we're getting like conflicting reports that we can't seem to fathom or understand quite clearly who's against, who's for, what the deal is all about. There are stages of the deal, like the second stage is President Biden presented, could go on basically forever, according to what's been published. And that's not I don't think it's a good sign for any side.
There is some ambiguous language.
Very ambiguous.
Residential areas.
You know, the devil's in the details, and that's kind of where we are. So, I think Netanyahu is, he's trying to be ambiguous for many reasons. He thinks, he can play hardball with what's going on the negotiation table. Doesn't want to seem too eager, which is completely logical and rational, understandable. But on the other side, there's such pressure within the government to force him to take a stand, basically
one way or the other.
Yeah. So it's a very tricky situation, and this is exactly where we are.
Do you think he was betting perhaps on Hamas rejecting this offer, as it has all previous offers?
I mean, we've seen this blame game taking on for months, and it's spins and media reports that are unclear. It's definitely that Hamas wants to end the war, and by right up till the President Biden's speech, it was very clear that Netanyahu doesn't want to end the war. But right now, he's been put under a lot of pressure from the U.S. administration to say, hey, if I'm putting the pressure now on Hamas, but you have got to stand behind this deal. And he's kind of, like you said, he's been playing both sides and very ambiguous. because from the Israeli perspective, to get his coalition, he needs to seem as he's opposing it. But from the U.S. side and the Western side, he has to say like he's for it. So it's a very tricky situation for him.
Very delicate line to walk. All right, Shuri, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, as talks continue, so does the fighting in Gaza. We can go to the south of Israel now. We're joined by our Nicole Zedek. Nicole, what's happening?
Yes, Laura. Well, as far as the latest update from the IDF, the military has confirmed that they're beginning a new operation in the central part of the Gaza Strip, specifically Al-Baraj. This is an area where the IDF first operated back in January, which at this point is about 6 months ago. So the IDF giving very little information at this point, but saying fighter jets are attacking different Hamas targets inside Al-Baraj, while ground forces are conducting precise military operations there as well. And so this could be something similar to what we saw with Jabalia, an area in the northern part of the Gaza Strip where we saw that even though initially the IDF had some operations there several months ago, they hadn't gone deep inside these camps and these cities. And so now, as the war does continue, we're seeing the IDF, as they do gain more intelligence and more information about the ongoing fighting, they're going back to some of these areas in the central and northern part of the Gaza Strip to conduct more operations. So this is the latest from the IDF. They said also in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, they just wrapped up a week-and-a-half long operation in Gaza's city Sabra neighborhood. And while they were there, they not only engaged with many close-quarter combat fighting with Hamas terrorists, but they also located a terror tunnel that's nearly 1 mile long and 14 miles underground. They were able to dismantle this tunnel, but it was also running very close to the Netzarim corridor, basically the area where the IDF has been operating for the past several months now, as it splits the Gaza Strip in half. And so they were able to locate that tunnel, dismantle it, and this is what we're seeing continuing going forward. The IDF says they're using this information to conduct more precise pinpoint operations throughout the Gaza Strip, where they do have the intelligence to do so. All the meanwhile, as we're talking about the central part and the northern part, I do want to remind everyone, of course, the fighting also continues in Rafah, but once again, with these more precise operations, according to the IDF, they are still uncovering different tunnel shafts, major weapons caches. They said they found large stores of RPGs, AK-47s, some very heavy weapons down there as well that they've been able to collect, dismantle, while also still dismantling dozens of Hamas terrorists in the Rafah area as well.
Nicole, thank you very much indeed. Nicole Zedek there in the south of Israel. Shuri Fein-Grossman with me in the studio. And Shuri, at the very point when Israel seems to be making very good progress, the IDF seems to be making very good progress in Rafah. We just hear this is more of a precise operations rather than what we saw early on in the war. There is this international pressure on Israel to wrap up the war. Would that be a mistake?
I think it's a very accurate sum up of what's going on. There's international pressure. People are fed up. It's really fueling a global power struggle between liberal and anti-liberal forces, and we've talked about this many times before, between the China, Russia, Iran axis and the U.S. And liberal forces around the world. And what we're seeing, the propaganda and and everything that's going on in the war, is kind of fueling that struggle. And Israel is, of course, on the liberal forces side, but that comes with a price, and that price is telling us you can't go on in this intensity forever. They need a break. Election period in the U.S. and other elections elsewhere. We have in the European Union. We just had in Mexico. We had in South Africa last week. Also, it's tied into the ICJK.
President Macron of France is the most recent world leader to speak out. He says the war in Gaza must end. No mention at all of the hostages.
Like I said, they're really mounting pressure on the internal. I see it. Everything is internal politics. There's a European Union Parliament elections. There are elections in Britain going on. So the liberal leaders of the world, this is bothering us.
They would like this wrapped up and done with.
Exactly. Enough is enough. And look, you have to say honestly, what are we getting if we'll get another year like this is going on right now? what will we achieve? This will take 3 years to clean up Hamas, but we'll lose the diplomatic arena, the economical arena. We'll end up with nothing, no normalization.
Yeah, we just
no
learned about the cost of the war, haven't we? Which is eye-watering.
It's not new. It's not new. It's something that we need to. This is kind of the baseline of what we should have assumed that it's going to happen. It can't go on forever.
All right, Shiri, thank you. While thousands of firefighters continue to battle blazes in the north of Israel, which was started by rocket and missile attacks launched by the Iranian-backed Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah, residents from the largely emptied-out northern border towns, such as Kiryat Shmona, are demanding that the government take action now. Our correspondent Robert Swift was in the north last night. Here's his report.
Throughout 8 months of skirmishes on the Israel-Lebanon border, there have been periods of heightened escalation. None so far have led to all-out war. But as the summer heats up, that may change. Kiryat Shmona's few remaining residents seemed shocked and angry as the hills around their evacuated town burned Monday night.
The firefighters seem to be prioritising those that are getting closest to the buildings because they don't look like they have the resources to deal with every single fire which has taken place in the surrounding hills. We've yet to see any firefighting planes or equipment of that nature.
The scenes coming just hours after a report by the Israeli comptroller blasting the state for abandoning northern communities intensifies pressure on the government to act. Whether or not Hezbollah intended to cause the fires, it may find advantage in them and seek to repeat the feat. As a psychological message to Israeli civilians, or as a smokescreen to obscure future attacks, the fires play to Hezbollah's hand. The IDF is preparing itself for an escalation on the border, with increased exercises in recent weeks and continuous targeted killings in South Lebanon. And Beirut has received diplomatic messages suggesting that Israel could launch an attack to reshape the current situation in mid-June, reported the pro-Hezbollah news site Al Akhbar. Such increasing tensions are added to by a meeting in Damascus of Iran's acting foreign minister with Palestinian faction heads.
All countries of the region, especially Islamic countries, must adopt a joint movement for the purpose of confronting the Zionists.
Leaving open the question of how far this current escalation will run.
Well, a newspaper affiliated with Hezbollah claims the UK has warned Beirut that Israel is planning a large-scale offensive in Lebanon. The outlet Al Akhbar said the British had warned the Lebanese to take necessary precautions. The US, meanwhile, is reportedly continuing with its efforts to negotiate some kind of deal between Israel and Lebanon. Joining me for more, Anshal Vora is an international affairs columnist at Foreign Policy magazine. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Anshal. And is the Lebanese government concerned about the prospect of war, and does it at this point have any leverage at all over Hezbollah and reining in Hezbollah's attacks?
Well, the Lebanese government does not have any leverage whatsoever on Hezbollah, but it definitely is concerned. There is a lot of concern in Lebanon, at least from what I'm hearing from people I know there, of Israel launching an attack against Lebanon on the pretext of Hezbollah perhaps launching a Hamas kind of October 7 kind of an attack against Israel. Having said that, the Lebanese government does not have any leverage over Hezbollah, but the Lebanese people do. Lebanese people do not want a war. They are already grappling with myriad crises, and there is an unsaid, unspoken pressure on the group to not go ahead and attack Israel in an even bigger way. And in Lebanon, amongst Lebanese people, across different groups, it's largely believed that Hezbollah is refraining and has been measured in its responses.
But we can see the pictures, Anshal, from the north of Israel. 10,000 acres have been burned in the last few days because Hezbollah continues to fire missiles. Major cities now like Akko and Nahariya. Akko actually has a large Arab population, incidentally, increasingly coming under attack. There is a sense here in Israel that that is unsustainable. Tens of thousands of people still can't go back to their homes. I mean, is there any sense in Lebanon of the reality Israelis are living with?
Oh, well, you know, if you talk to the Lebanese people, they'll tell you that there have been many more casualties inside Lebanon when it comes to the current tensions between Israel and southern Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah specifically. And it's really about the narrative that Hezbollah is playing out inside Lebanon. And in that context, I said that the Lebanese do not think that Hezbollah is the aggressor. However, having said that, of course, thousands of people have vacated in Israel or on the border with Lebanon, but also in Lebanon the same has happened, and these people, you know, who've left their homes are of course suffering. So I think, from my understanding, Hezbollah does not actually want to be a part of a full-fledged war. Hezbollah is in the game broadly for its own sake, and it has a whole country to run. It has, in the sense, it has influence as a non-state actor. It also is a political party, but essentially because it's armed, it has a lot of influence over Lebanon, and it wants to retain that. So it doesn't want to go to war with Israel, but it's also an ideological group. So the concern is, if this ideological group will actually go ahead and attack Israel, I don't think so. I don't think that its attacks will increase. One way, I think, to avoid the war is, of course, for Hezbollah to, as agreed earlier, sort of go back and give a buffer, so if Israeli government feels and Israelis feel Hezbollah cannot carry out an attack like October 7 against Israelis. But if, on the other hand, Israel launches a full-fledged attack on Lebanon, it would actually be legitimizing Hezbollah's existence and making it gain support, and it doesn't have much support in many communities in Lebanon.
Well, there have, of course, been diplomatic efforts to resolve this, but the way it's seen in Israel is that the international community failed already to keep Hezbollah back away from the border under the UN resolution 1701, and they're unlikely to now want to outsource their security again in the wake of October 7th. Iran clearly wants to escalate whatever the Lebanese people want. So, I mean, is war inevitable now?
No, I think it can be avoided. I don't think it's inevitable because, as I said, diplomatic efforts are ongoing, and even if they don't yield anything, an attack is not going to eventually help. My personal analysis is Hezbollah does not want a war with Israel. It wants its control over Lebanon, and it understands that if it increases the intensity of its attacks in a way that we see more casualties, a high number of casualties in Israel, Israel will definitely attack Lebanon. It understands that, and it doesn't want the blame, because essentially, as I said, it's in the whole game for itself, for its own survival, for its own power politics. And if Israel instead launches a full-fledged attack for concerns you're mentioning, then it would be legitimizing Hezbollah, and that, I think, is a bigger worry. So Israelis, I don't think they want a full-fledged war either. They just want guarantees that Hezbollah does not carry out the attacks it is carrying out currently, but also, you know, from my senses, the bigger fear is that Hezbollah could unleash one of its secret or special trained groups to carry out a Hamas-like attack in future. That's what Israeli establishment is more worried about. So I think the war can be avoided, and it must be.
What about Hezbollah's long-term aims then in Lebanon, as you were just speaking about their political considerations? Are they hoping to expand their political power beyond their base? Is that how they foresee their long-term plan, if you like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they would like to have more seats, but I don't think they particularly need to, because they sort of see themselves first as an armed resistance against Israel, an armed force protecting Lebanon. This is what they say their role is. And they would, I mean, this is an Iranian project, is to have is to have militias who are also politicians with political power in several countries in the region, and this is the big problem, or has been the big problem over the last decade or so. So of course they would like to have more, but I don't think they desperately need it, because they are the only group that has arms in Lebanon, so they already have the power.
All right. And Shalvora, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Shireen Grossman with me in the studio. What are your thoughts then, Shireen? Are we headed for all-out war? Is this sustainable, this current situation?
I hope not. A war in Lebanon at this time will achieve nothing but destruction for north of Israel and the south of Lebanon and maybe Lebanon itself. And it might be even bring a destruction to whole of Lebanon. And that will have a ripple effect on Syria, Iraq, Jordan, which is an essential part of stability in the region, which is key and very important. So the region can't handle another huge refugee crisis, and I don't think it will achieve anything. I mean, you can't just, we're saying push back Hezbollah across the Litani, but the Radwan forces, Hezbollah, there are the residents of the villages in South Lebanon. You can't really distinguish between who's civilian and who's a military operative, because there's a complete synergy between those two.
Who then can offer Israel the security guarantees that it needs? Otherwise, essentially, Israel has lost a large part of its territory, because nobody will want to live in these northern border towns.
Well, look, my assessment is as follows. As soon as we have a ceasefire in the south, we'll have a ceasefire in the north. And as soon as we have that, we need the IDF to stand on both of those borders, and everybody, any person, doesn't matter who, that comes near the border should be shot there, and they can't approach the fence. And if
so that would be similar to what we saw in Gaza in 2018.
That's it has to go back.
Drew international condemnation. Of course.
Yeah, it will be international condemnation, but there's no solution. There's no long-term solution of this, and we have to change. Again, perception, education, radicalization. If we don't, we have to use non-military means to defeat what's going on. It's not only military. You can't win this battle against Iran with just military means. It just doesn't work like that.
So Israel will have to accept Hezbollah just across the border?
Well, it has been accepting that for a long period of time. I think we actually would be in a better place, a place where we're not deterred to act within Lebanon. We'll be much more forceful about, but it needs courage. It needs a leadership that says, the day after we have a ceasefire, if I see something is happening, I will act. And I think, I'm not saying there shouldn't be a war one day, but not like this. You should have the element of surprise. You should be ready. You should have enough forces. Israel, the IDF forces needs to, strengthen. It needs more soldiers. It's something that requires time, but we need to be prepared.
Well, quite, and it was interesting to hear how it could actually backfire in terms of turning the Lebanese population more pro-Hezbollah, which would be more of a problem in the long term as well.
It's always a possibility. Look, Lebanon is, to call it a functioning country will be, quite a step. It's really, you have to understand the politics of Lebanon, what's going on. Even without Israel, it's been falling apart for a long time, and just international forces like France and US and Britain are holding it together very fragilely. And again, the source is Iran of what's going on, and that needs to be dealt with, and not the proxies.
All right, Shireen Grossman, for now, thank you. We're going to take a very short break. When we come back, we'll talk about Iran, because the European countries are putting forward a resolution to hold it to account for its nuclear program. More on that next.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Welcome back. Iran's nuclear chief has warned Tehran will respond if the UN's nuclear agency passes a resolution against it. A draft document submitted by France, the UK and Germany calls on Tehran to provide explanations for undisclosed uranium and undeclared nuclear sites. But a recent report in the Wall Street Journal claimed the Biden administration had been trying to prevent European countries from pressuring Iran over its nuclear program amid fears it would escalate tensions ahead of the US elections. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Jason Brodsky. He's the policy director of the group United Against a Nuclear Iran. Good to see you, Jason. Thank you for being with us. It seems the Europeans are finally taking steps, aren't they, to try and hold Iran accountable over its nuclear program. Is it a case of too little too late?
I think it is too little too late. It's the bare minimum of what the Europeans should be doing. I agree with their desire to advance the ball and to put a table of censure resolution this week, but they also have a lot of work left to do in Europe writ large. For example, denying permission of the many Iranian banks which are operating in Europe to this day. Prescribing the IRGC as a terrorist organization. The list goes on. So this is a step in the right direction. It's necessary, but not sufficient.
And this follows comments from the IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi. He said that Iran is becoming more aggressive in its pursuit of a nuclear bomb. And he, of course, was in Tehran in May. We're not used to this kind of strong language from him, are we? Do you think that the IAEA itself is becoming more aware of what Iran is up to?
Well, I think his comments are reflecting a reality where the Islamic Republic has been emboldened in its nuclear escalation because of a non-response from the United States and its allies. The history of 2021 forward shows that Iran has made its greatest strides in its nuclear program during the Biden administration. After the Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA, Iran took gradual but carefully calibrated and reversible steps to break out of the constraints that were a part of the JCPOA. And I think that speaks to a stunning lack of deterrence from the United States and its allies with respect to Iran's nuclear program.
Well, the US reportedly is concerned that this move by the European countries will make Iran even more aggressive. The Biden administration still going down the diplomatic route, still trying to get the JCPOA going, it seems, by holding talks with Iran in Oman. You think they're still holding out for a deal before the election?
I don't think that there will be any deal before the election. Tehran does not want a formal nuclear deal before the election because it wants to see what the political situation will be with the United States. But I remain deeply skeptical of the utility and the effectiveness of any kind of nuclear diplomacy with the Islamic Republic as long as it remains the Islamic Republic. And I think it's time the United States and its European allies to wake up to the reality that there will never be a productive working relationship with the Islamic Republic as long as it remains the Islamic Republic. And until we take that message, we absorb it and understand it, as the last 45 years have shown us, we're going to continue to have the same problems.
There's been some pushback, hasn't there, inside the US from Congress. Is this becoming a political problem for Biden? If he doesn't do something, is he risking looking weak in the run-up to the elections?
I think Iran has always been a political problem for the Biden administration, and that's because it has been pursuing a policy since 2021, which is not endorsed by bipartisan majorities of the U.S. Congress and of the American people. This policy does not have sustainable political support in the United States. And we need to come to some kind of consensus as to what the acceptable contours of a bipartisan strategy are in Iran. And I see very little evidence that there is any attempt in Washington and on the official level in Congress and in the administration to get to that point. And until we do so, we're going to continue to have these wild swings in Iran policy that really only benefit the Ayatollah.
Jason, thank you very much. Jason Brodsky there.
Thank you.
And Sharifan Grossman is with me in the studio. With all of this going on with Iran's proxies, it is steadily working on its nuclear program. And just yesterday, allegedly an Israeli airstrike killed an IRGC general, Sayed Abiyah, in Syria. Last time that happened, of course, we remember Iran fired hundreds of missiles at Israel. Do you think they will respond this time?
It doesn't. Well, look, we have more than ability, I think, this time. Israel hasn't admitted it that it did that, as far as I know, and that's kind of the way.
Just an allegation, yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of it's back to that game, the old game of deniability. And no, I don't think it will react. I don't think it achieved anything with the attack. But like your last speaker said, I think the U.S. and other Western forces need to stop playing defense only and think that will save them. We, as the front of Western and liberal democracies, saw what playing only defense means. It means that one day they'll come to attack you. And so if you're not playing offensively, if you're not being very assertive, very aggressive, if you're just hanging in there and let's do, alliances of defense, that's not enough. The other side is very aggressive. It's pushing the boundaries. We've seen what happened with the Houthis. The international supply is disrupted. We can't just look back and say, okay, we're just continuing business as usual and trying to avoid a regional escalation. No, we're stronger than Iran. Show them we're stronger. Be assertive, be aggressive, and that's the way to deter them.
All right, Sharifina, thank you. Well, staying with Iran, one woman, a hardliner who called for the execution of anti-regime protesters, has registered as a candidate for the presidential elections there next month. Zoreh Elahian is one of dozens hoping to replace the late Ibrahim Raisi, who was killed in a helicopter crash. Turnout is expected to be low, following a record low turnout for the parliamentary elections earlier this year. And of course, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, will have the last say. Our senior correspondent, Bianca Zanini, has more.
80 candidates, one winner. Iran's next presidential election will take place at the end of the month. Iranians will elect a successor to former President Ebrahim Raisi, who died in a helicopter crash on May 19th. The applicants will be reviewed by a 12-member election body, the Guardian Council. Among the main candidates is Iran's hardline parliament speaker and a former vice president, Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf, a candidate with close ties to the Iranian paramilitary Revolutionary Guard.
If I don't register for these elections, all the work that we have started towards resolving the economic issues of the people in the popular government and the revolutionary parliament, which is now at the stage of fruition, will remain unfinished.
He'll face another front-runner and former Vice President Eshaq Jahangiri, who served under former President Hassan Rouhani.
I will run for president to attract votes from Iranians that seek a better life, the removal of sanctions, capable managers, extensive and sustainable development, a flourishing economy, and less inequality.
Iran's infamous Holocaust-denying former president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, also registered as a candidate. Popular among the poor population, Ahmadinejad remains a controversial figure with a strained relationship to the country's de facto ruler, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. He is likely to be disqualified by the pro-Khamenei Guardian Council. The election, sparked by the sudden death of former President Raisi, comes at a time of heightened tensions between Iran and Israel over the war in Gaza.
The Zionist regime is gradually melting away before the eyes of the people around the world. It's running out. People around the world are seeing this. Of course, the Israelis talk and make propaganda. But the reality is this. They know this. Politicians around the world know this. And a lot of nations understand this. The Palestinian people have understood this too.
In addition, relations with the West are at a low, with countries criticizing Tehran's rapidly advancing nuclear program and its arming of Russia in the Ukraine war. On Monday, European powers submitted a draft resolution to the IAEA's Board of Governors, pressing Iran to explain a wide range of issues, including barring access to international inspectors and uranium traces found at undeclared sites. If the resolution passes, Iran says it will, quote, react, potentially by escalating its nuclear activities.
All right, so a look inside Iran there, and you know, I remember the debate a few years ago was about the hardliners versus the reformists and whether it would actually make any difference in Iran, and we can see this is a very brutal, oppressive regime. It doesn't matter who is the figure as president, it's the Ayatollah that controls everything.
Exactly, and we're just seeing it get worse and worse. I think Raisi was one of the worst, the butcher from Tehran, and thank God he's not longer with us. I'm happy for the people of Iran. Having said that, I don't think this is going anywhere positive, and the hardliners are winning the debate, and it's getting more and more extreme, and there's no really unforeseeable solution outcome here. We kind of know who's going to be voted in, and like you said, the supreme leader is the one who's really he's really deciding on what's going to happen, but I think Raisi and the other hardliners did affect policy and did, in the end, Iran, and I think the culture is the one that it does listen to all kind of voices, and the fact that you have such extreme people next to you will affect what you decide. If you have more moderate voices around you, I think that has an effect. So hopefully, now that Raisi is gone, we'll kind of see a change, but I'm not very positive.
Yeah. And of course, is this another missed opportunity by the Americans? They failed to support, President Obama failed to support the Green Revolution in 2009. President Biden didn't do anything for the Masa Amini uprising. And the president has just been killed. And again, another missed opportunity. Do you think that America is just scared to take on Iran?
So it's a complicated issue because there are pluses and minuses, and there are cases in history where the U.S. has intervened in other people's, other countries' internal politics, and the result wasn't so good. So it's a complicated issue, and whenever you take that decisions, you have to be very committed to it and act in the long term, and that's kind of very problematic. Just to follow through with this kind of strategy.
Shiri Fan-Grossman, thank you very much indeed. A rare look inside Yemen now as the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels continue to wreak havoc on global shipping with missile attacks they claim are in solidarity with the people of Gaza. Well, Channel 12's Ohad Hemo got a rare glimpse into Tehran's well-funded efforts to get poverty-stricken Yemenis to support the Houthis and direct their hatred at Israel, a country thousands of kilometers away. Take a look.
We are now at the gate of Yemen, in the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. Hello, Ohad Hamo's followers and the viewers from Israel.
A greeting from the heart of a hostile Arab country is an unusual event, but nonetheless, there is one man willing to speak with us from a country that literally has engraved on its flag calls for the destruction of Israel.
Good evening to the Israeli viewers. Here we are leaving with a huge march from Kalan al-Sharaf to support the Palestinian people and their fighters.
He is a Yemeni citizen who lives in the heart of Houthi-controlled Yemen. He opposes the rule and acts alone, armed with a camera. He risks his life and enters demonstrations in support of the Houthis, surrounded by armed men who chant death to Israel.
We are currently in a demonstration in the Kalan al-Sharaf area. We've organized a demonstration here in support of our Palestinian brothers.
At the beginning of the war, we saw these pictures, almost 2,000 kilometers from Israel, in a far and impoverished southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, soldiers and volunteers preparing for war against Israel. At first, it seems ridiculous. What relation do we have with them? Without a common border, a lack of history of war, these images are seen as far-fetched. This was our starting point for the story, but what we found out was that among the mountains grew a whole society characterized by hatred of Israel, and those ready to act in the name of this hatred. Immediately after that came the firing of ballistic missiles and UAVs, making the 1,600-kilometer journey towards Israel. The Houthis, have entered the war.
There are millions in North Yemen. All of them speak one language: hatred of Israel.
Let's talk about what appears to be an absolute Houthi obsession with Israel. What is the Houthis' connection to Israel?
Part of their ideological view is also related to a very strong anti-Israel sentiment, also with an anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish and anti-American dimensions. In this sense, October 7th suited the Houthis very well, and they're currently gaining a lot of sympathy. They're making gains in the Arab world and within Yemen, even from those who oppose them. And it seems they are not really paying a price for their actions right now.
I don't know how many armies in the world can launch a coordinated barrage like the Houthis launched at the State of Israel at a range of thousands of kilometers, both missiles and UAVs, these capabilities that are already found in advanced armies. Therefore the Houthis have definitely acquired for themselves enormous capabilities and knowledge, most of which came from Iran.
We are filming from the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. The economic situation is very bad, and there is a fear of some kind of outbreak in the streets because of the economic situation. People are tired and oppose wars. People are discouraged that after the war with Saudi Arabia is over, Yemen could enter into another war with America and Israel. This is about the ordinary people who oppose the Houthis. Those who support the Houthis are interested in war, even if the entire nation is killed and everything is destroyed. We are now on 60th Street near Sana'a University. These signs say, boycott American and Israeli products.
When I asked him to photograph evidence of anti-Israel sentiment in the streets of Sana'a, I received countless examples in a moment. It's everywhere, he says. These signs about boycotting Israeli and American goods. This is the Houthi flag, on which is written, "Death to Israel, death to America, God curse the Jews."
We're at Square 70, the People's Mosque, the Salah Mosque. Used to be called the Salah Mosque, today it's called the People's Mosque.
Al-Aqsa flood, the name of the war in the Arab world, hangs here next to a picture from Gaza. And of course, these are the maps. Like here, where he sent me a picture of the demonstrations from a central square in Sana'a. The map says it all.
There are no Iranians on the Yemeni streets, or Lebanese or Hezbollah supporters. But on the military side, there is military training and experts assisting even if they are not visible. The reality is that they exist and are rooted in with the Houthis.
This is time to put a big asterisk here. With all due respect, this is a distant enemy, and not so relevant to fighting with Israel. So there is no reason to worry, but it is still worth getting to know this enemy and understand that it is nothing less than an obsession.
In addition to the military assessments, every 2 days, the Houthis here find a new batch of soldiers from the People's Committees, or the so-called People's Army. They volunteer for war in preparation for any war that may or may not come.
And there is the most important front related to the Houthis that is already affecting the whole world. After the damage to ships allegedly connected to Israel in the Red Sea, the Houthi threat to attack such ships comes from another front, the Mediterranean Sea even.
Even when we don't hear that the Houthis fire or attack naval targets, they do it, between 1 missile and 3 a week.
In order to sink these ships?
The ship does not have to sink. The fact that the freedom of navigation is vulnerable, due to the damage to the shipping lanes, 20% of the world's supplies travel there. This is a significant enough statement, and the vessel does not have to be damaged.
I'm not sure that the provocation of the Houthis, at least not in the arena of the seas, will stop when an agreement is reached between Israel and Hamas. I think that the Houthis have tasted success in a way that perhaps they did not expect it. They also have ambitions to revive a religious state.
Are you surprised that the world didn't really stand on its hind legs and fight back against the Houthis because of this threat?
I thought it would be more significant, but I think the world also understood that in order to harm such a terrorist army, it is not enough that you only deal with defense. It is not enough that you only protect vessels sailing at sea. You also have to go to mow the grass. Then it may also be an underground entrance.
We are now in the Al-Dis district in the east of the Yemeni Republic. We are now going to hear the opinion of the people here about the Houthi militia.
These interviews were filmed for us in the last few days in other parts of Yemen. in areas that oppose the Houthis. Here, there is still no love for Israel, of course, but in Mikbat, there is a great hostility towards the Houthis.
Why are the Houthis so hostile to Israel?
الحوثي لم يعد إسرائيل. الناس دين يركزوا على غزة ومعاناة غزة. قلنا هذا التمثيلية ومسرحية. إيران وأمريكا وإسرائيل كلهم عملة ذات وجه واحد. ما يعادوا إسرائيل، هم إخوان إسرائيل. الحوثيين والصهاينة هم جماعة واحدة. والحوثي هو أصلا من حوث. وحوث أكثر من ثلثينها يهود. يدعون الموت لأمريكا والموت لإسرائيل إنهم يحاربون أهل الإسلام. دعوة باطلة هذا إنهم ضد اليهود، ليس ضد اليهود، لأنهم متفقين على الإسلام هم اليهود مع بعض.
The Yemenis cannot understand how they will enter this war while the Houthis declare that they are ready for this war. The mountains and warehouses, all of these full of weapons, whether ballistic or heavy or light weapons. Those who oppose the Houthis cannot express their opinion in public, especially since recently the Houthis arrested several important people just because they opposed the war or because they published posts warning against participating in the war in Gaza.
A rare look inside Yemen. Now, the UAE has announced a ban on unlicensed digital platforms that teach the Muslim holy book, the Quran. Authorities say they want to make sure that people are getting a correct education and are not given incorrect teachings or misinterpretations. From now on, anyone who wants to teach the Quran must have a license. Well, joining us for more on that now from Abu Dhabi, Loai Al-Sharif is a peace activist and an expert in Arab-Israeli relations. Good to see you as always, Loai. Thank you for joining us. Why is the UAE doing this now then? Have online so-called scholars become a problem in terms of radicalization?
Well, first of all, Laura, thank you so much for hosting me. And it's, first of all, I commend the leadership in the UAE for doing this. And absolutely, you have to understand, Laura, that it's a preventive measure. So before you have a problem with people who have these kind of misinterpretations that can lead the youth to have some sort of a violent action against others based on some interpretations of the Quran or the Hadith or the Islamic tradition sources. So it cuts the road to those who want to do this, and it tells them that you have to be licensed. And no one should be angry about that, Laura, but you have to know that there are so many preachers who go online, claim that they teach people the Quran. And you know, Laura, we are in the Arab world, and especially in the Gulf, we are very religious people by nature. So it's very easy to tease these kind of emotions with religion, and to tell people, if you want to obey God and his messenger, then follow what I say. And then you start with, I'm just telling you the steps of what so many people do. They demonize the rulers, they demonize the Gulf states, they demonize directly and indirectly. Look what they have relations with Zionists, or they have relations with the infidel West. And then you start to have radicals. So by having licensed scholars or licensed preachers, you can have a control over them. They are not mad. So this is a very important step.
Well, this is a big problem in Europe, and there's been an explosion of late of so-called Islamic scholars. Some people call them hate preachers, and they get very large online followings, and they pretty much tell people whatever they want, and they say it's in the Quran, and people don't bother going to check for themselves. The European authorities have been trying to crack down on funding to radical mosques, but how can they ever keep up with what's going on these digital platforms?
They can keep up, Laura, by learning from those who know. I always say that. When the Europeans understand that giving freedom to the wrong people who would misuse it in order to spread the pathological creed that would destroy the freedom that they were granted, then maybe they would wake up. So there has to be a great line that differentiates between freedom of speech and hate speech. Hate speech, or hate preachers, as you say, who preach hate against the countries that hosted them, who preach hate against the countries that sheltered them, who preach hate against their fellow human beings because they are Jews or Christians or non-believers, and then they do this using the freedom that they were granted. Laura, unfortunately, many people in the West say, Luay, we cannot take away the freedom, because taking away the freedom of speech is like taking away our God. I'm not telling you to take away the freedom. I'm just telling you to differentiate between the freedom of speech and hate speech. Thank God this is not the case here in the UAE, because you have things censored, and I truly support that, Laura, because freedom of speech hate speech should never be tolerated, and there are severe laws here in the UAE against those who speak against other minorities or other religions or other sects or other denominations. So this is very important for Europe to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there similar moves going on in Saudi Arabia, Luay, where authorities recently took out anti-Semitic references from school books, for example?
I always say this, Laura, the UAE and Saudi Arabia are leading the way to a moderate Middle East for so many Muslim countries. And I trust that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed Salman, is doing a great job in reconciling a new version of Islam that is, it's not a new version, it's the moderate Islam that is reconciled with other faiths as well. So I see lots of changing happening in the curricula. Last time I checked was like 2 years ago, and it was different from what we've been taught in Saudi 25 years ago, I would say. So there is a great understanding of the need to modify the curricula, not for the sake of anyone, Laura, but for the sake of the people, because the rulers and the leadership in the Gulf, they understand that religious emotions can be triggered by hate speech and by hate preachers if they get to know to the emotions of people by telling them this is what pleases God and his messenger and this what doesn't. So people get emotional, and then when you attract the attention of those people by emotion, you can direct them to do whatever they want, whatever the hate preachers want, and this is so dangerous. So yeah, Saudi Arabia is absolutely doing this, and the UAE as well, and this is for the sake of everyone, Laura. And I hope that people in Europe would understand what people who know are doing and follow suit.
Well, let's hope they're listening, Luay. I'm not sure they are, but we can always hope. Thank you very much indeed, Luay Al-Sharif there in Abu Dhabi. Well, that's it for tonight's show. Many thanks for watching, and do stay with us on I24 News. Khaled Ben-David will be with you right after this.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park Hayarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, espadas de hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I24 News.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. It is day 242 of Israel at war. And as the battle for Gaza still rages on in the south, there is mounting concern over the deteriorating security situation in the north of the country. Air attacks launched by Hezbollah from South Lebanon have intensified in recent days, with no foreseeable situation in the near future that would enable the safe return of over 80,000 residents evacuated from the border region. And as the hot summer months blow in, the north finds itself not just under fire, but on fire, with raging blazes sparked by the bombardment. Robert Swift has more in this report.
Throughout 8 months of skirmishes on the Israel-Lebanon border, there have been periods of heightened escalation. None so far have led to all-out war. But as the summer heats up, that may change. Kiryat Shmona's few remaining residents seemed shocked and angry as the hills around their evacuated town burned Monday night.
The firefighters seem to be prioritising those that are getting closest to the buildings because they don't look like they have the resources to deal with every single fire which has taken place in the surrounding hills. We've yet to see any firefighting planes or equipment of that nature.
The scenes coming just hours after a report by the Israeli comptroller blasting the state for abandoning northern communities intensifies pressure on the government to act. Whether or not Hezbollah intended to cause the fires, it may find advantage in them and seek to repeat the feat. As a psychological message to Israeli civilians, or as a smokescreen to obscure future attacks, the fires play to Hezbollah's hand. The IDF is preparing itself for an escalation on the border, with increased exercises in recent weeks and continuous targeted killings in South Lebanon. And Beirut has received diplomatic messages suggesting that Israel could launch an attack to reshape the current situation in mid-June, reported the pro-Hezbollah news site Al Akhbar. Such increasing tensions are added to by a meeting in Damascus of Iran's acting foreign minister with Palestinian faction heads.
All countries of the region, especially Islamic countries, must adopt a joint movement for the purpose of confronting the Zionists.
Leaving open the question of how far this current escalation will run.
And our correspondent, Deborah Benayoun, is in northern Israel, and she filed this report a short time ago.
Yeah, it's a very hard situation here at the northern border. A lot of attacks have been run from 9 a.m. throughout the day. Here we are in Kiryat Shmona, and my cameraman is going to show you the situation here. We see the smoke from the fires from yesterday. We hardly see the landscape, actually. We just see the smoke. We smell also the smoke from the numerous fires that have been caused by attacks by rockets and drones fired from Hezbollah. Over 30 firefighting crews were working against the fires, and several major roads in the Galilee area have been closed. Does it mean that it looks like the red line that the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, has talked about several times? In any case, the population is shocked by the situation, and the War Cabinet has scheduled a meeting to talk about the situation tonight at the northern border. And in the meantime, the IDF continues to strike Hezbollah positions in South Lebanon, where, for example, also in Nakura, a terrorist has been targeted on a motorcycle, but not exclusively in the south, also deeper in the Lebanon, like, for example, in Beka near Baalbek.
You're also in the north today, IDF Chief of Staff Herzl Halevi at Northern Command, and he had this to say.
We are coming to the point where we're going to have to make a decision. The IDF is ready and prepared to make that decision. We've been attacking for 8 months now and have made Hezbollah pay a price, a very high price. And we are prepared, after training, up to the level of the highest command, to move on to attack in the north. A strong defense is one prepared to attack, and we are approaching that point.
And joining us in studio, Yaki Dayan, former Israeli consul in Los Angeles. Good evening. And Reserves IDF, good evening. Reserves IDF Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital, former commander of Special Forces in the IDF. And Doron, we heard the Chief of Staff there. We're reaching that point. Is the IDF ready? And what are we talking about here when he talks about an attack?
I think, first of all, the IDF is ready. We saw those exercises and those plans set up. And of course, I think when he thinks of an operation, if there will be conditioned in terms of sync with the US and legitimation and what we need for such a campaign, then a limited campaign in the south of Lebanon to push Hezbollah to the Litani order, hitting Baalbek, which is like a logistic...
With troops moving, Israeli troops moving across the border?
I'm not sure this is the first stage, but there's no question that there's a plan and forces prepared and set with the possibility of a military campaign in the south of Lebanon. Sure, there's no question about that. The question whether it can go in stages, maybe major attacks in Baalbek, as we do all the time, major Air Force attacks in the south. In terms of Beirut or Lebanese infrastructure, Beirut is the headquarters of Hezbollah, and Lebanese infrastructure, this is an escalation that brings Lebanon in as a state. And I think what will be important to see that there is a legitimation to go to this campaign, and it's very much connected, of course, the equation is connected to what's going on in the south. If there's a hostage deal and there's a truce, maybe there would be a possibility of a diplomatic campaign, but rest on the credible military option that Israel prepares.
All right, but there are, as Doron implied there are some diplomatic, geopolitical considerations, Yaki, in making this attack.
Many open questions that should be addressed. The first one is ammunition, whether Israel has sufficient ammunition to go for it. The second one is the Americans. Clearly, the Americans wants to bring a cessation of fire in the south, and no doubt in the north as well, because the elections are coming, and they don't want to see any war, any escalation whatsoever. The fatigue of the reserves in Israel, the situation of the economy, and more than anything else, I mean, one should take into consideration that once a complete war starts up in the north, Israel will be completely under fire. It's not only the northern part of Israel, but it will be Haifa and Tel Aviv and other parts as well.
Right, because Hezbollah has missiles that can reach the entire breadth.
Exactly, Kalev. So all those questions have to be addressed, and those are not easy questions to answer, especially not after 8 months of war in the south. So as much as war is needed up in the north in order to change the situation, this is not a clear-cut answer here.
Right, and the War Cabinet is convening this evening. Surely the situation in North, everything you've just said, both of you, this is obviously going to be in the discussions there.
Sure. And after the devastation that the world sees in Gaza, it will be very hard for us, for example, to attack Beirut. There was this doctrine that was called the Dahir doctrine, which is the headquarters of Hezbollah, and we were all the time putting it forward as an option. Now, to see us hitting now Beirut, this is a tricky predicament, and I think the greatest emphasis is, of course, the sync with the U.S. To go to war in Lebanon without being in sync with some kind of backing of the U.S. would be, I think, possible but hard.
Yeah, but one point should be mentioned here, that if we go to war, there should be no difference between Lebanon and Hezbollah. It should be addressed as one, meaning you should hit very hard the infrastructure, something that was not done in 2006 in the Second Lebanese War.
Now, as you said, the question of going to war in the north will have a lot to do with how the war is going in the south and whether there's a hostage for ceasefire deal. Now, the Qatari government did confirm today that it has passed on to the leadership of Hamas the latest hostage deal that was proposed by Israel and announced over the weekend by U.S. President Joe Biden. Meanwhile, spontaneous protests broke out last night across Israel following the IDF's announcement of the deaths of 4 elderly hostages in Gaza, with demonstrators demanding immediate approval for an agreement that would release the remaining Hamas captives. Now, the demand comes as both Israel and Hamas reportedly have delegations in Cairo today as mediators try to seal a deal. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has the details.
With a much-awaited ceasefire and hostage deal for Gaza still unresolved, an Israeli delegation is in Egypt on Tuesday to try to complete the task, coinciding with a delegation from Hamas also visiting Cairo. According to the Lebanese Al Akhbar newspaper, citing Egyptian sources, the deal will reportedly take effect at the beginning of next week, despite Hamas not yet giving its official response. The report added that Egypt fears Israel will not fully adhere to the ceasefire after it receives some of the hostages.
Hamas is holding women, children, the sick, and the elderly hostage in Gaza. We will keep on doing everything we need for their freedom, to bring them home. This is what any other decent country in the world will do.
The visit comes hours after Israel announced the death of 4 Israeli hostages in Hamas captivity. All 4 appeared in psychological warfare videos released by Hamas as they begged for their lives. The army is checking whether they were killed by IDF fire.
Today we shared the devastating news with the families of 85-year-old Amiram Cooper, one of the founders of Kibbutz Nir Oz, 80-year-old Chaim Perry from Kibbutz Nir Oz, 80-year-old Yoram Metzger from Kibbutz Nir Oz, and 51-year-old Israeli and British citizen Nadav Popelwell from Kibbutz Nirim. That their loved ones were killed a few months ago during Hamas captivity in Gaza, and their bodies are still being held by Hamas. We assess that the 4 of them were killed while together in the area of Khan Yunis during our operation there against Hamas.
Following the announcements, several hundreds of Israelis took to the streets across the country, demanding an immediate deal. With more than a third of the remaining Israeli hostages in Gaza believed to be dead, Monday's announcement illustrates how, despite claims of major achievements on the battlefield, Israel is getting closer and closer to Hamas's demands. Raising the question, is Israel actually doing all it can to bring back its hostages and alive?
Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent, Balir Sladin, who's at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. And Balir, of course, Hamas now has the proposal, but we know Hamas is not a monolithic body. There are different views in it. And within the Israeli government, there are often also some differing views about whether to proceed with this agreement.
Yes, and let's start with the latest on Hamas's stance today. The Hamas official in Lebanon, Osama Hamdan, is saying a few minutes ago that without a clear stance for Israel for the willingness to end this war and a complete withdrawal of the Israeli soldiers from Gaza, there will be no deal. That's what they have said to the mediators. He is saying, and he is saying as well, that we are not going to agree to any deal that doesn't contain the complete withdrawal of the Israeli soldiers and then a serious hostage exchange. Now, that's what we know from Hamas's stance, and we still didn't get the official Hamas response, but the discussion is ongoing in Israel. If we look at the government of Israel, which is the sole body that takes the final decision whether to agree to such a deal or not, after the announcement from the Shas party today, that comes after the announcement also for Yahdut HaTorah, both the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox parties, we know that 11 of the ministers that are in the government, which consists of 38 ministers, are agreeing and supporting such a deal. If we add to that Hamehaneh HaMamlachti and the 18 ministers of the Likud party, we will get to 32 supporters against 6 who are opposing the deal, which are the religious Zionist parties, the Smotrich and Ben Gvir parties. So there is actually a majority inside the Israeli government for such a deal, although that we don't, or still at least not clear about what the small details are for such a deal. But the huge question should be what will happen to the government after such a deal is agreed to, if we take in consideration, of course, the threats from Ben Gvir and Smotrich that are saying that if Israel goes into an irresponsible deal and a dangerous deal, as they are describing it, they will bring down the government, something that Netanyahu apparently should be also taking in consideration.
Well, I'm sure he is taking consideration. I'll just also note that Yair Lapid, out of the opposition Yesh Atid party, says he'll provide a security a blanket, if you want to say, supporting the government for the time being to prevent its collapse, but it's not clear how long he would support Prime Minister Netanyahu to keep him remaining in power. That is a consideration. Balir Saladin, thank you for that. And Yaki, a lot of moving parts here. As Balir said, there is a majority, it's clearly in the government, for that deal that outlined by President Biden. But again, question is whether there's enough diplomatic ambiguity in the terms. The devil is in those details, as he said, to enable also Hamas to claim some kind of victory here.
Exactly, Caleb. This is the point. I mean, there is no doubt that this is the Israeli proposal. The first question is it the entire Israeli proposal? Because we see that needed things are not there, such as the demilitarizing Gaza on the day after, the role of the Hamas on the day after that shouldn't be there. I mean, many open questions there. And no doubt that Netanyahu understands one thing. He can move the hostage deal if he wants to, but his political survival is not there. I mean, he will lose not only his coalition, he will lose his government. And I'm not sure that Netanyahu is there right now. He's not willing to lose his government for this hostage deal, because getting a blanket, as you said, from Lapid and the Machane Mamlechti and the Haredi and all of that, that's not enough for it, because this would be a blanket. This would be some kind of security only for the hostage deal, but on the day after the hostage deal, he will lose his coalition. He will have to go to an early elections, and this is something that I think he's not there. So there is some kind of a contradiction between the political will or the political needs that he has and the hostage deal that is there.
Well, I just want to say, though, we did raise the possibility, for example, of a campaign against Hezbollah during a ceasefire in the south. There might be the promise of a normalization with Saudi Arabia there. So there might be other processes created by a hostage deal that could ultimately, I don't know if ensure Netanyahu's survival, but could change the whole picture.
Well, the tension clearly exists between his political survival and the deal. But I think the plan that is set by Biden, this roadmap, and we have to take...
It's not by Biden. I mean, it's by Israel.
It was announced by Biden.
Announced by Biden.
It was, I want to take credit because Nitzan Alon, the head of the negotiation team, was a soldier man, and he's the guy who created this outline that was then approved of the Israeli plan, went to Biden, and in a very nice game theory trick was imposed, return to Israel as a plan. But I think this is less a plan and more than a roadmap. And I think this is the terms that Biden was using. It means there would be many ambiguities, many things open, but this is the only way to go forward. And there will be a few milestones. And there's no question that the Israeli public and the political landscape, except Smotrich and Ben Gvir, wants us to move forward. Now, what would it mean? How would it end? It's not clear. And the North is connected, because the way Biden sees it and the way I think many people see it, a truce in the South, a truce in the North, diplomatic campaign, and maybe Hezbollah would be willing to go to the 1701, and this would be an end game that can allow us to return our citizens. If not, a military.
Right. I would say that this is a
very optimistic,
overview by Doron.
I would say this is a diplomatic campaign that is being held by a credible military leverage or threat that you can always employ.
But listen, the thing is that Netanyahu is going next week to the Congress, and one of
not sure yet.
Not clear.
No,
it's not clear
that he is. Yeah.
So most probably he's next week in the Congress. Maybe he's not there. I mean, but anyhow, he's going to the Congress. And one of the things that he will be very obvious is stating that anything that would end with the Palestinian state, meaning the normalization with Saudi, the entire vision that Biden has, is a non-starter.
Right.
So I would say that the normalization with Saudi Arabia now is not in the cards.
All right. Again, once these things get started, one is not quite sure.
I think the major question whether they can go to the Congress without admitting or accepting the hostage deal in some sense.
Okay. Well, we'll leave that for now. Well, let's get back to the security front. Israeli forces, of course, continue to carry out what the IDF is calling pinpoint operations in Rafah, the last Hamas stronghold in the Strip, in the southernmost city. IDF forces also active in central Gaza. Troops there engaged in killed dozens of terrorists in Gaza City's Sabra neighborhood and also carried out airstrikes at targets in the Deir al-Balach camp. For more, let's go to our correspondent, Nicole Tzedek, who is in southern Israel. And again, we keep talking about a hostage deal, a ceasefire, Nicole, but active operations. The battle continues there in Gaza.
Certainly, that is the case until anything is signed on paper. These military operations inside the Gaza Strip are going to continue. And you are exactly right, Kalev, that we are seeing these pinpoint operations in multiple places throughout the Gaza Strip right now. One of the heavy places continues to be Rafah, as the IDF continues to gain different intelligence and operate to eliminate dozens of Hamas terrorists, uncover different tunnel shafts and large weapon caches as well. And so that's part of the fighting in the Rafah area, but new fighting that the IDF announced, new operations now happening in Barrage. This is in the central part of the Gaza Strip, an area where the IDF first started operating and last operated back in January, about 6 months ago. However, this is likely a situation like we saw with Jabalia in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, where months ago we did see the IDF go in and operate, but more in the surrounding area and not deep inside these towns, these cities, these villages. And so that's why we're seeing them go back into the barrage camp, likely now with this new intelligence and still conducting precise operations, they say. Right now, they're doing joint operations with the Israeli fighter jets to do airstrikes targeting Hamas terror infrastructure in barrage, as well as different ground troops doing precise operations on the ground as well. And so very little information at this point from the IDF as to exactly those military plans, but they also said, as you mentioned, in Gaza City's Sabra neighborhood, after a week and a half, they wrapped up this operation. And during that operation, they were also able to find a tunnel that was just under a mile long, 14 miles below ground, and very near to the Netzarim corridor, the corridor where the IDF has been operating. This is the corridor that basically splits the Gaza Strip in half between the north and the south. And so the IDF, using their intelligence, was able to locate this tunnel shaft, delete the entirety of the tunnel as well. And so likely going forward, the IDF says this is what we will continue to see with the precise operations and the intelligence that they're gaining from these operations as well, allowing them to go forward, eliminate Hamas terror infrastructure and Hamas terrorists as well.
All right, Nicole Tzedek there on the Israel-Gaza border. Thank you for that, Nicole. Activity also on another front, the West Bank. IDF troops intercepted and killed 2 terrorists near the city of Tulkarem as they approached the security barrier to fire on Israeli communities adjacent to the Green Line, as we've seen on several occasions over the past week. Well, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant paid a visit to the area of that incident today and had this to say on possible new security arrangements in the West Bank.
During the visit, the need arose for a rapid intervention of forces with capabilities based on the residents of the settlements and graduates of combat units in the IDF. We will know how to equip them, train them, and allow them the ability to arrive and intervene in any incident that may develop throughout the area.
And Doron, the context there is the, as I said, intensity, the increase in attacks there in the West Bank, and also we have to say, also the criticism that Yoav Gallant has received from the Israeli settlement community in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and those politicians, such as Itamar Ben-Gvir, who represent them.
Yeah, for sure, but we have to protect those civilians, and I think this is a lesson learned from the 7th of October, that we have special forces, we have military personnel all over the northern Samaria. The northern Samaria is on fire. Basically, we are conducting a war there all the time. But you need those quick intervention of citizens that live in the area and can react very fast to anything that happens. And I think this is a lesson learned and now implemented in northern Samaria. So it's a necessary move.
Right, but as I said before, that this is the one, we have the northern front, the southern front, the last thing the IDF and I think the government wants to see, certainly the defense minister, is the West Bank become a more active battlefield.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many fronts, but Israel is investing day in and day out in this front. So many arrests have been done, so many interceptions have been done. So Israel is operating day in and day out in Judea and Samaria, because this is a very important front.
Right, and we do see Hamas continually making comments, trying to sort of ignite that, to draw away some of maybe the IDF out of Gaza into the...
It didn't succeed in the fashion that he aimed to, but northern Samaria is really where they act, but it's not only Hamas people. We have jihad, we have also people that are associated with Fatah. I mean, we really have a situation here. Also, the old close cooperation with the Palestinian Authority is
the fact of the matter is that the Palestinian Authority lost control completely of northern
One
Samaria.
incident now, the Palestinian Authority were arrested. He turned himself in, the guy that ran two of our soldiers, and then he was set free. He was claimed it's an accident. This would not have happened, I hope, in the previous kind of cooperation we had. So this is tricky.
Right. I'm not so sure that's the case, but there have been different examples at different times. But Yaki, Diane, Doron, Avital, stay with us. We are going out for a brief break. We'll have lots more on this special edition in a moment. Stay with us.
On October 7th, the shocking attack of Hamas resulted in the devastation of more than 20 communities in southern Israel, the murder of 1,400 innocent people, and more than 253 hostages. KKL-JNF immediately assisted in the evacuation efforts of the survivors, purchased new ambulances, and sponsored psychological support for traumatized children and adults. KKL-JNF Switzerland is determined to rebuild these destroyed communities of Eretz Kharkim again so that the families can return home. Join us now.
¿23?
Ya.
72.
Ya.
¿Qué hora es? Ya por debajo de
Welcome back to this special edition on I-24 News, Israel at War. Now, as we've mentioned, we've touched on Israel's relationship with the U.S. in this program. And U.S. President Joe Biden has, well, let's call it a complicated relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. And while the White House waits to see if the prime minister moves ahead with the hostage deal and ceasefire that President Biden desperately wants, the president has spoken out in a new interview with Time magazine about that deal and about Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. And Mike, definitely some interesting comments in that interview.
The comments coming right after Joe Biden said he wouldn't comment. Those are always the ones that get you in trouble. I'm not going to comment, but let's talk about it anyway. So it's no secret that Benjamin Netanyahu and Joe Biden have had their differences and continue to, but Biden laying them out a little bit further in detail, asked whether at this point he feels that Benjamin Netanyahu has been dragging out the war for political reasons. Biden said, I'm not going to comment, but, quote, there's every reason for people to believe, unquote, that Netanyahu has done just that. Biden didn't say that was his opinion, just that there's every reason for people to believe that. But at the same time, and just a few sentences later, Biden said, hey, Netanyahu is doing all he can right now to get out the hostages, that he's put together, good faith proposal, which Biden unveiled a couple days after this interview, to get those hostages out. So sort of mixed messaging there from Biden as to whether he feels Netanyahu is dragging out this war for personal reasons or not. He said he doesn't want, and he said he made this point as soon as he landed in Israel post-October 7th. He does not want Israel to make the same mistakes as America did in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he feels that Israel is making some of those same mistakes. And while he feels that some military operations by Israel and some actions have been, quote-unquote, inappropriate, he does not feel at this point that they amount to war crimes, and certainly not at the level of starvation of Gazans, as some are accusing Israel of doing. But you and I, Kalev, have had this conversation, I don't know how many times, ad nauseum, about what is the biggest disagreement right now between Benjamin Netanyahu and Joe Biden. I've said time and time again, above any particular military action, above any particular decision or strategy or antagonistic statement, the biggest disagreement, I've told you this for months now, has been that Netanyahu refuses to tell the Biden administration what the strategy is for the day after Hamas, because without that, there's really no long-term planning available. There's nothing that America can rest its hat on in terms of when the war might end, in terms of any actionable objectives. And Biden laid that out clearly in this interview. He said, beyond anything else, that is the biggest disagreement I have with Benjamin Netanyahu. No strategy right now for the day after, and it's so tough to move forward without that. Whether that message, resonates in Jerusalem, if it hasn't yet, it probably won't after this interview. It might have the opposite effect of maybe, digging in heels a little bit more in terms of the Israeli government. But obviously, everything that was going on behind the scenes kind of being aired out more in this interview with Time.
Yeah, as I said, it's complicated, as the expression goes. And just one more thing, Mike, we've been discussing the hostage deal being discussed in Jerusalem and Washington, and there in New York, also in the UN now.
That's right. The United States putting forward a draft resolution in the UN Security Council calling on Hamas to implement the agreement that apparently was reached, or at least was unveiled a few short days ago, calling on Hamas to accept it fully and to implement it immediately, mentioning all the benefits that will arise for both sides of the equation should it be done. And also included in that resolution is a call for a reunification, essentially, of Palestinian Authority governance, both in Palestinian territories in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and also in Gaza. Now, the Israeli mission to the UN just moments ago refused to comment on their position on this resolution. Two diplomatic sources I spoke with gave me the impression that Israel feels a little bit boxed in by this resolution, even though the onus is specifically on Hamas to accept this resolution. They feel that if Hamas inevitably kind of changes the terms here and there, the onus will shift back to Israel in terms of accepting it, and something that Israel is not committed to doing at this point in time. Again, it's just a draft resolution, and it's just being discussed in its beginning phases right now. No telling when it actually might come up for a vote, and there will certainly be objections to it by the likes of Russia, China specifically, because the onus is on Hamas at this point, according to the language in the resolution.
Right, and of course, the current Israeli government is specifically against allowing the Palestinian Authority a role control in the West Bank, which was implied by this resolution, so one could see the reservations there. Mike Wagenheim in New York, thank you for that. Still with us, Yaki Dayan, and Lieutenant Colonel in the reserves, Doron Avital. And Yaki, this relates very much to what we were talking to before. You have to always wonder with President Biden, most politicians, you know, there's a strategic reasoning behind when they make these kind of comments. With President Biden, you're never quite sure if, well, he just had to blurt out what he was thinking at the moment.
One thing we know for a fact, you know, it's not by coincidence that President Biden stood on Friday and actually published publicly the Israeli proposal, because there is a complete lack of trust between Biden and Netanyahu. And I mean, you should add to that the fear that Biden would stay, the fear of Biden, that he would stay with a very right-wing coalition. If Gantz leaves the coalition, he would stay with the 64, in which Smotrich and Ben-Gvir would dictate the future of Gaza and the rest. Those are the main fears by Biden, and this is why I mean, publishing this thing is first and foremost pressuring Netanyahu, and this is the fear with the Security Council resolution. The Security Council resolution is obviously aimed to the Hamas, but not only. It is aimed for Israel in order not to leave any place for Netanyahu to maneuver out of this deal. And having this resolution in the Security Council doesn't mean necessarily that China or Russia or Algeria would necessarily support this.
As Mike said, they might well...
exactly, because everything, it's so cynical, Kalev, because eventually they will get their instructions for the Hamas. If the Hamas doesn't want to support this deal, they would tell Russia and China, don't support this deal, and they wouldn't support this deal. This is how cynical the Security Council is. So we are here in a loop. President Biden is trying to get out of this loop because he wants to end this war clearly as fast as possible, and he knows that this can come only by releasing all the hostages, but he has to pressure Netanyahu. This is how he feels, because there is completely lack of trust.
And I think it pressures not only Netanyahu, it pressures the Israeli public. He feels that the Israeli public is behind him, and he feels very confident, he has confidence in Benny Gantz and Eisenkot and the rest of the war cabinet, and now that he have the Orthodox on his side. So I feel he feels that there's no other path forward, and he's trying to push the two sides to the same path, though of course they have two readings. Hamas wants the end of the war and to stay in power. We want Hamas out of Gaza, not to rule Gaza and not to have any military capacities, and the freedom to act militarily when there's a threat. Right. So putting it like this, the two things don't add up, but I think going forward there would be some way to pave them to the same.
Just to conclude, to echo what Mike said, right now the onus is on Hamas to at least agree to the outline.
And President Biden said that, actually.
Right.
But I think Hamas, they're smart enough to accept the deal in some kind of qualification.
Only if they rest assured that of its survival.
All right.
Of course.
That's what they want.
But they see in the deal the option to be
the coming days will tell, gentlemen. I'm going to also stay focused abroad. Now, the wave of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic incitement that swept the world since October 7th has also sparked a grassroots counter-effort among Jewish communities, among Israelis and supporters of Israel to intensify efforts to combat that hatred, everything from lone influencers to groups who have been involved in public advocacy and diplomacy for Israel. Now, one of the latter is Israel Is, an NGO that enlists and trains young Israelis, drawing on their talents to improve Israel's image abroad. Now, when we report on what we call solidarity missions, it's usually in reference to diaspora Jews who come to Israel to express support for people that need it. But a delegation of Israel is now in Toronto, Canada, to give its support to a young man there, a 17-year-old Eitan Cohen, who found himself the target of anti-Semitic bullies who threatened to, quote, do to him what Hamas did to Israel. And joining us from Toronto, Canada, is Aviv Kornis, Partnership Coordinator for Israel Is. And Aviv, tell us about the decision to buy Israel Is, which we should say predates October 7th, I believe 2017, doing advocacy for Israel, to go on this solidarity mission to Toronto.
Correct. So when we heard about this incident that Eitan has gone through in his school, we were just shocked with the amount of, anti-Semitism, which comes also from the system as a whole and also from the kids in the school. And so by the understanding of what's happening, we decided that this is our next location to go to. We have to show our support to that amazing family, the Cohen family as a whole, and to Eitan, of course, this brave boy who just stood there and, stood tall and didn't take any of that. And so we decided to come all the way here to Toronto and show our support. We are all reservists ourselves, and we wanted to give that hug to this amazing kid all the way here.
Well, tell us about reactions there, because again, as I said, usually we think of diaspora Jews coming to Israel to express their support. So how has it been on the other side there, being in a place like Toronto?
So it's been incredible getting, the support of the community here and their appreciation of us coming here. But in the end, as we always tell everyone we meet here, there's two wars going on right now. There's the war in Israel that we are fighting and we will win, and all of us here, again, reservists, are taking part in. And there's the war of the anti-Semitism that's rising across the world. We were just a month ago in Philadelphia and New York. We're now in New York City again, and we're going to Sydney. And also here in Toronto, we realized that the community needs us to come and give as many tools as we can, as you said, social media, which is going crazy with anti-Semitism in it. So we're bringing as many tools to defend Israel online and defend ourselves online. And so also coming and meeting college students and hearing them and what they've been through and giving people the chance to speak about it and be in a safe space for them to share those horrible things that they've been through since October 7th. So we get a big hug from the community here around the schools and around the campuses.
Right now, Aviv, if I'm correct, was started really as a grassroots from young Israelis traveling abroad and encountering, unfortunately, some of the negative image of Israel abroad and the incitement. I'm talking about all going back to 2017. In a way, you were ahead of a curve, were you not? Because now just imagine what young Israelis will face when they go abroad in the coming years.
Correct. So Israel 7 years ago has already realized that this is something that's going to happen and it's going to grow. And so we wanted to give soldiers who are being released and are going on their big trip after the army service the tools to share their story, to be better storytellers of their experiences in the army and Israelis as a whole. And then since then, we've realized that it can go a long way if it's on social media, if it's on, in the communities here and in general in campuses around the U.S. and Canada. And so we really realized that since October 7th, our job has been even, more on the rise to get to as many people with different things. We have a VR initiative called Be the Witness that brings the stories of October 7th to campuses and to communities worldwide in immersive experience to understand what that day has been through for Israelis. And so it's different types of sharing a personal story. But in the end, our goal, as you said, was already 7 years ago to share what Israel is through its people. And we will just keep doing this because there's no other way for us to share our stories but be out there and talk about it.
Right, and definitely it's a more challenging environment. I just briefly, very briefly, more young Israelis gotten interested in the organization since October 7th because of what they've seen abroad?
Yes, absolutely. Israelis, by the way, and Jews across the world, we're getting a lot of requests to get more tools to come to different communities. Also in Israel, we're going to do a big event in the upcoming months for travelers who are, reservists who are now being released from the army again and want to go on the big trip. And so we're planning that to give them the tools. So yes, absolutely. People want to take a stand. People want to be activists.
All right, Aviv Kurnis of Israel you were ahead of the curve, kind of unfortunately, I would say, but good luck in your vital mission. I want to thank Yaki Dayan and Doron Avital for joining us this evening on our special edition. We are going to keep our focus now back in the region and deal, of course, with another front that we haven't even mentioned earlier in the program. Now, a ballistic missile heading for a Eilat and intercepted yesterday by the Arrow air defense system over the Red Sea, was just the latest attempt by Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels to attack Israel since October 7th. Now, in this report, adapted from Channel 12 News, we can see just how deep the hostility against Israel runs in Yemen society. Let's take a look.
We are now at the gate of Yemen, in the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. Hello, Ahad Hamo's followers and the viewers from Israel.
A greeting from the heart of a hostile Arab country is an unusual event. But nonetheless, there is one man willing to speak with us from a country that literally has engraved on its flag calls for the destruction of Israel.
Good evening to the Israeli viewers. Here we are leaving with a huge march from Kalan al-Sharaf to support the Palestinian people and their fighters.
He is a Yemeni citizen who lives in the heart of Houthi-controlled Yemen. He opposes the rule and acts alone, armed with a camera. He risks his life and enters demonstrations in support of the Houthis, surrounded by armed men who chant death to Israel.
We are currently in a demonstration in the Kalan al-Sharaf area. We've organized a demonstration here in support of our Palestinian brothers.
At the beginning of the war, we saw these pictures, almost 2,000 kilometers from Israel, in a far and impoverished southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, soldiers and volunteers preparing for war against Israel. At first, it seems ridiculous. What relation do we have with them? Without a common border, a lack of history of war, these images are seen as far-fetched. This was our starting point for the story, but what we found out was that among the mountains grew a whole society characterized by hatred of Israel, and those ready to act in the name of this hatred. Immediately after that came the firing of ballistic missiles and UAVs, making the 1,600-kilometer journey towards Israel. The Houthis have entered the war.
There are millions in North Yemen. All of them speak one language: hatred of Israel.
Let's talk about what appears to be an absolute Houthi obsession with Israel. What is the Houthis' connection to Israel?
Part of their ideological view is also related to a very strong anti-Israel sentiment, also with an anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish and anti-American dimensions. In this sense, October 7th suited the Houthis very well, and they're currently gaining a lot of sympathy. They're making gains in the Arab world and within Yemen, even from those who oppose them. And it seems they're not really paying a price for their actions right now.
I don't know how many armies in the world can launch a coordinated barrage like the Houthis launched at the state of Israel at a range of thousands of kilometers, both missiles and UAVs, these capabilities that are already found in advanced armies. Therefore, the Houthis have definitely acquired for themselves enormous capabilities and knowledge, most of which came from Iran.
We are filming from the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. The economic situation is very bad, and there is a fear of some kind of outbreak in the streets because of the economic situation. People are tired and oppose wars. People are discouraged that after the war with Saudi Arabia is over, Yemen could enter into another war with America and Israel. This is about the ordinary people who oppose the Houthis. Those who support the Houthis are interested in war, even if the entire nation is killed and everything is destroyed. We are now on 60th Street near Sana'a University. These signs say, boycott American and Israeli products.
When I asked him to photograph evidence of anti-Israel sentiment in the streets of Sana'a, I received countless examples in a moment. It's everywhere, he says. These signs about boycotting Israeli and American goods. This is the Houthi flag, on which is written, "Death to Israel, death to America, God curse the Jews."
We're at Square 70, the People's Mosque, the Salah Mosque. Used to be called the Salah Mosque. Today it's called the People's Mosque.
Al-Aqsa flood, the name of the war in the Arab world, hangs here next to a picture from Gaza. And of course, these are the maps. Like here, where he sent me a picture of the demonstrations from a central square in Sana'a. The map says it all.
There are no Iranians on the Yemeni streets, or Lebanese or Hezbollah supporters. But on the military side, there is military training and experts assisting even if they are not visible. The reality is that they exist and are rooted in with the Houthis.
This is time to put a big asterisk here. With all due respect, this is a distant enemy. and not so relevant to fighting with Israel. So there is no reason to worry, but it is still worth getting to know this enemy and understand that it is nothing less than an obsession.
In addition to the military assessments, every 2 days, the Houthis here find a new batch of soldiers from the People's Committees, or the so-called People's Army. They volunteer for war in preparation for any war that may or may not come. We are now in the Al-Dis district, in the east of the Yemeni Republic. We are now going to hear the opinion of the people here about the Houthi militia.
الحوثي لم يعد إسرائيل. الناس ديما يركزوا على غزة ومعاناة غزة. قلنا هذا التمثيلية ومسرحية. إيران وأمريكا وإسرائيل كلهم عملة ذات وجه واحد. ما يعادوا إسرائيل، هم إخوان إسرائيل. الحوثيين والصهاينة هم جماعة واحدة. والحوثي هو أصلا من حوث. وحوث أكثر من ثلثينها يهود. يدعون الموت لأمريكا والموت لإسرائيل إنهم يحاربون أهل الإسلام. دعوة باطلة هذا إنهم ضد اليهود. ليش ضد اليهود؟ لأنهم متفقين على الإسلام هم اليهود مع بعض.
Yemen. Now, the events of October 7th and beyond has no doubt left an indelible trauma for the Jewish people. And with the ongoing war, healing and moving forward is proving all the more difficult. A mental health conference here in Tel Aviv brought together many of the leaders in the PTSD and collective trauma space. Emily Francis was there, and she followed this report.
Welcome to GHI's Mental Health Conference. I want to start by acknowledging the historic moment in which this conference is taking place. The events of October 7th have left an indelible mark on our nation. The world has changed. The last 8 months have been mired with grief, sadness, and fear, alongside resilience, hope, and healing.
A convergence of mental health professionals and renowned international speakers on topics of trauma and advancements in emerging therapies in the shadow of October 7th.
What is the future of the mental health of our nation that we as clinicians now need to brace ourselves for and prepare ourselves for? And how are we going to tackle something that none of us have ever had to deal with in our generation?
We are here in these very, very challenging times, and I would like to address these issues that we are facing, mostly regarding post-traumatic stress disorder.
Keynote speaker Dr. Mouli Lahad is a pioneer in Israel in dealing with trauma for nearly 50 years. He says the events of October 7th and the subsequent war against Hamas has created an unprecedented level of trauma.
We have some trouble with using the term post-traumatic stress disorder because it's not post, so I rather call it prolonged traumatic stress disorder. Instead, we're looking at it as what we call grief response. We have lost I would say, confidence in the government, in the army, in our belief system that we will be there and never again. And I think this, beyond everything, has caused a lot of suffering here.
The situation is only made worse by the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic vitriol spreading like wildfire around the world, triggering an inescapable trauma with a multi-generational epigenetic component.
I would say the Jewish people somewhere, I would say, have what I call cell memory of the trauma. I think this accusation, this denial, this rejection is making it very difficult for people to move on because they have to hang on to the memory even more so than if people would have allowed them to process it.
All of us have been born into a pre-traumatized world, and we are often not aware of that fact. And that's why I think seeing trauma as individual, ancestral, and collective is really important.
Also a keynote speaker, Thomas Hubel, who is well known around the world for developing the collective trauma integration process, also known as attunement.
History is us. You know, integrated history, integrated life is living through us. We learned what many, many generations before us learned. It lives through us. But unintegrated history, the history that was traumatizing, is the past, and that past keeps repeating itself.
The good news is that all the experts believe there is a path toward healing through a collective sense of community, as well as more access to mental health professionals and new treatments.
Olim come and there's a language barrier. and they don't have their usual resources that they're familiar with. So there's so much that Olim fall through the cracks. And that's part of what Get Help Israel does, is we bridge the gap in mental health care for English speakers.
Similarly, we heard from the executive director of MAPS Israel discussing the advancements in psychedelic therapies in treating severe cases of PTSD, with hopes of getting FDA approval soon.
We have the small research sample that we've worked with, but the promise of a new treatment that can approach things in a different way and offer a different path towards healing is extremely hopeful for a lot of us.
Overall, everyone who spoke is confident and hopeful about a brighter future because of the strength and resilience of the Jewish people for thousands of years.
Community support services were invented, so to speak, by Jewish communities around the world for generations. So I think it's part of the mentality or the makeup of our concept of what helps people to recover. We can't change the past. We can process it, we can help people to live with it, but altogether we have to look to the future, and that's where hope comes into.
In Tel Aviv, Emily Francis, I-24 News.
I think all people that have experienced trauma on many different levels over the past, since October 7th, certainly, should get the aid and help and that they need to deal with this situation. That ends this special broadcast on I-24 News, day 242 of Israel at War. You can continue to follow us, of course, on our website and our various social media sites. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the program. Benita Levine